In just 10 days, George Zimmerman goes on trial for the second-degree murder of Trayvon Martin, accused of killing him and charged with second-degree murder. Mr. Zimmerman has pleaded not guilty and claims he shot Trayvon Martin in self-defense. Last night, for the first time, I was able to talk about that defense with Mr. Zimmerman's lawyer, Mark O'Mara. One of the key pieces of evidence we discussed was Mr. Zimmerman's call to police and his admission that he was following Trayvon Martin just minutes before he shot and killed him.
He's running.
He's running? Which way is he running?
Down towards the other entrance of the neighborhood.
Okay. Which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
Last night, Mr. O'Mara said there was no evidence Zimmerman continued to follow Trayvon Martin after the dispatcher told him not to.
You have to understand that there is no evidence whatsoever, and the state has not brought forth any evidence to suggest that Mr. Zimmerman was following Trayvon Martin after the dispatch said you don't have to do that, because Ms. Zimmerman's answer was okay. There's no evidence to support that he continued to pursue.
No evidence he continued to pursue. It's a key question, and the police asked Zimmerman about it in one of their interviews.
I left my house to go.
At the point where you said, are you following him, you just said, Bill, did you do that? What went through your mind?
He's right.
So you should have stopped and went back to your vehicle.
I still wanted to give him an address.
The police say Zimmerman should have returned to his truck, but he didn't. In his own walkthrough with police, Zimmerman showed how he continued down the sidewalk to get an address before turning around and walking back to come face-to-face with Trayvon. A few months later, Mr. Zimmerman went on national TV and gave this explanation of what he meant by following Trayvon.
I meant that I was going in the same direction as him, to keep an eye on him so that I could tell the police where he was going. I didn't mean that I was actually pursuing him.
Mr. Zimmerman says he wasn't following Trayvon Martin. He was merely going in the same direction as him, seeing which way he was going. This is a key question for the trial. Was this armed man actively pursuing Trayvon Martin in the final minutes before the shooting? Joining me now is the lawyer for Trayvon Martin's family, Benjamin Crump. Benjamin Crump, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Reverend Sharpton.
Now, what's your reaction to what the defense has said about Mr. Zimmerman following Trayvon Martin?
Well, I think you just illustrated with those series of actual confessions from George Zimmerman about his pursuit of Trayvon Martin. The story keeps changing. And we have to remember, Trayvon isn't here to tell us his side of the story. So what George Zimmerman says has to be vetted very carefully, because an unarmed kid has been killed. And we have to remember, credibility is the issue. And we know that George Zimmerman has already had credibility issues with the court because he told untruth or misled the court when it was concerning him getting out of jail. So the question for the jury is, will this person tell an untruth or mislead the court to not go to prison? And I think that is certainly something that's going to be very relevant in this trial. We heard the objective evidence of him pursuing Trayvon Martin.
Now, when he says he was just following to see where he was going, but he wasn't pursuing him, I mean, how do you make a self-defense claim if you were told by a dispatcher, we don't need you to follow, you say okay, but you decide to follow anyway? Is this a critical point in the trial, Mr. Crump?
It is very critical aspect. There are several critical points. I think the voice analysis is critical, but when you think about the fact that the objective evidence shows us that he was running after Trayvon Martin. Not what I say, not what Mr. O'Mara says, but what we hear with our own ears. We hear the wind blowing as he's running. And what does he say when he first get out to chase Trayvon Martin? These a-holes always get away. Oh, he's running now. And then you hear the chase, and the dispatcher say, "Are you chasing him?" And he says, "Yes." Now, he wants us to believe that he just stops and goes back to his car, but there's no objective evidence that he goes back to his car other than his word. So it does become about credibility. And would George Zimmerman tell an untruth to not go to prison for killing unarmed Trayvon Martin? That is the question for the jury. They have to judge his credibility.
Now, there's another point that you just mentioned is going to be critical, and that is the tape. O'Mara says to me last night, the state's voice expert never said it was Trayvon Martin screaming on the 911 call. Listen to Attorney O'Mara telling me this last night.
You also mentioned that the state expert said that it was Trayvon Martin, and they actually didn't say that. If you look at the reports, they suggest that at times there was Trayvon's voice, and at other times, particularly before the shot, that it was George Zimmerman's voice. There's none of the state's experts that have come back and said conclusively that was Trayvon or conclusively that was George.
But we went to the report, and this is what the report says, quote, Mr. Crump, it says, the other male speaker was identified tentatively as Trayvon Martin from the audio track of a digital video file present on Mr. Martin's cell phone. His voice is younger, and he generates much of what some observers have called screams. The state's voice expert does believe it was Trayvon Martin screaming at the end of the 911 call. Mr. Crump?
And Reverend Sharpton, you're absolutely right. The voice experts, we know that they said it's Trayvon Martin's voice, and that's two of them, and they said it's either Trayvon and George Zimmerman screaming for help. Either way, it is very troubling for George Zimmerman's defense because, my God, if Trayvon Martin is yelling for help and he shoots him in the heart anyway, that's not second-degree murder, that's first-degree murder. But if it's a situation where Trayvon is screaming for help, George Zimmerman is screaming for help, it contradicts George Zimmerman's version that Trayvon Martin was trying to kill him because he's screaming for help. And so why shoot somebody who's screaming for help? And that is a big issue in this case. And when you really think about it in the totality of circumstances, George Zimmerman, as this neighborhood watch, patrol, volunteer, going around the neighborhood with a gun on prescription medication is every parent's worst nightmare, because God help you if he comes up to your teenage child and says, "What are you doing around here?" and your teenager doesn't answer the question right, then you have a Trayvon Martin situation at your doorstep. And we can't have that in a law-abiding society.
Just one thing before we run out of time. Let me go back to this tape that the experts have said, this expert said was Trayvon, and Mr. O'Mara says he didn't say it. Let me play you part of the police interview with George Zimmerman, where they play him the 911 call with screaming. We've redacted the part of the call where the witness gives the address. But listen to this.
Listen to this one.
911, do you need police, fire, medical? Maybe.
Hear that voice in the background?
Both, I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming. 911, do you need police, fire, medical? Maybe both, I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside. Okay, what's the address that they're near? Twin Trees Lane. Is this in the Twin Lake Towns in Sanford? Yes. Okay, and is it a male or female?
Are you hearing yourself?
It's a male. And you don't know why? I don't know why.
The police say, that's you. Are you hearing yourself? He says, this Zimmerman says to the police, it doesn't sound like me. This is him saying that himself.
Exactly, Reverend Sharpton. And, you know, it's very ironic that here they are trying to attack Tracy Martin, who within 48 hours of losing his son, they're saying, do you recognize this, and play a clip? But when George Zimmerman is played the same clip, he says he doesn't recognize it. So shame on them for attacking this grieving father when the defendant himself, the killer himself, their client, is saying that it doesn't sound like him. Isn't he more relevant? He was there that night. He was one of the only two people who knew exactly who was screaming for help. And he said, in his own words, it doesn't sound like me. That is very telling. That is very relevant.
Well, what's interesting to me is he says that it doesn't sound like me, but he could have also said, if it were the case, but I was screaming for help that night. He just said it doesn't sound like me, never said anything about he was screaming or there was some screaming going on. Very interesting, and we'll see where this goes at trial. Benjamin Crump, thank you for your time tonight. And full disclosure, in civil court, George Zimmerman has sued NBC Universal for defamation, and the company has strongly denied his allegations. We'll be right back.